I have a little book called Wartime Recipes. And the important thing is that this is not about the Second World War, but the First World War. And this was not a government production. It was put out by John Wanamaker. Any of you that lived anywhere near Philadelphia knew John Wanamaker. John Wanamaker was the premier store in Philadelphia. And so they spent as much time talking to people and trying to educate them as they wanted to. They felt they had an obligation to do so. So this one was picked up, I guess, by my mother, and she took it home, and she was a good cook to start with. And the recipes, I think, are still good. I hope you can pass this on for some cooking demonstrations. But anyhow, World War I. Two things: they didn't have rationing, but they had shortages once in a while. So they're saying, well, you know, if you can't get this at the store, try that, and that sort of a thing. So when we say wartime recipes, some of these would have been great even in peacetime. There's no doubt about it. Irish stew in casserole, Irish yet. Braised stewing beef, beef a la mode. Wartime soups. Let me see if I can read that. It is unnecessary to use meat stock for a vegetable. It is almost a crime to use fresh meat to make stock. They talk about waste in cooking, start a stock pot, save the high cost of eggs by preserving them when they are inexpensive, this sort of thing. The late President Herbert Hoover, he was sort of elected president because he was the one that controlled food feeding Europe after First World War. There were no airplanes, or no efficient ones, and so we had to transport things by ship. The biggest problem was that even after the war, Europeans on both sides were close to starving to death. And so this is why all of the shipment of food and things was so important. Now we're going to go from one war to the next. World War II. War Ration Book 1. Who should control the consumption of food? Shouldn't it be the Department of Agriculture? No, they started one called the Office of Price, P-R-I-C-E, Administration. Why should it be price? Well, they were afraid, two things: that they were going to have runaway inflation, and that only wealthy people could buy food, and particularly the families of some of the soldiers left at home, they didn't get anything there. So not only did they control what you could buy and what you had to do, but they in effect controlled the price. So the answer was, you know, we're all going to live, we're all going to suffer a little bit, but we're all going to do it together. This book has a number of different coupons. I can't remember how they were then, but they're green and blue. Some were for canned goods and things like that. And each had a cost in stamps related to that. So it didn't matter whether you were in Ohio or Texas or New York, the cost was going to be the same. And that was pretty astounding. These were sent to us, and this one says Herbert S. Wilcox, and it gives my address in Ridgewood, New Jersey. It's hard for me to imagine even now. This was without computers, without internet, without anything. How in the world do they keep track of all these people? Of course, they talk about it even on the back. Never buy ration goods without ration stamps. Never pay more than the legal price. Again, this was to stop people buying up stuff, and everybody had a share, which was, to me, that was the amazing thing of this whole thing, that didn't matter how much money you had, you were entitled to this much food, and it worked. This is a form called TIRE, T-I-R-E, application. And that sounds rather odd, but it turns out that rubber for tires certainly is not native to the United States. It had to be imported, mostly from South America. So rubber was in very, very short supply. And what many people think is that the government figured out if we could cut down the number of miles we drove with our gas, we would cut down the wear on the tires. Now, if you finally one of your tires went flat, they had a thing called recapping and things like that, but then you had to fill out a great long form saying, justifying why you need a new tire. And, but again, in the large part, the people felt that they were helping the war effort. I guess that's the word they used to use. And of course, really, the war stopped in two stages. First in Europe, and then almost a year later in the Far East. It was, in a way, almost more of a relief than a celebration. But it pulled people together, and that's the way we should be.